Similarly, some early modernists held that the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac and Jacob never existed. They contended that these persons were the creation of later writings or later writers who invented them to fit in with the writer's purpose. Today, the historical background of the patriarchs is too well known to deny their existence. Again, early modernists believed that the concept of ethical monotheism, the belief in only one God who demanded justice of his people, was a late invention. Today, many modernists feel that the ethical elements of monotheism were present in the religion of ancient Israel almost from the beginning. In addition, the evidence now seems to indicate that even among the polytheistic religions, which believed in many gods or pantheon of gods, the gods were looked upon as the rulers of the entire world. The idea of a universal God or gods who ruled the universe was part of the belief of many religions. And a fourth point too, the position of the early modernists is not followed today. Formerly it was held that the real unity of the ancient Israelites was not achieved until the time of King David and King Solomon. This was more than 200 years after the Exodus from Egypt. Now scholars hold that this sense of unity had progressed quite far by the time of Joshua, the successor to Moses. Thus the contemporary modernists believe that the sacred traditions and institutions of ancient Israel are much older and more authentic than they were thought to be by the early modernists. They go back to the earliest period of Jewish life in Canaan, to the time of Joshua and the judges, as well as to that of Moses in the Sinai desert wilderness. Would they go back to Abraham? We wonder. In Ur of Chaldee, in those original Hebrews. It is generally agreed today that a new approach to the biblical traditions is required. The older critics, it has long been realised, proceeded too largely on the assumption that the Excerpt, the 5 books of Moses in the book of Joshua, was the product of a purely literal activity which came into being by the editing together of written documents. They conceived their task, therefore, almost exclusively as that of unravelling these various strands, that they might study each in isolation. While the possibility was granted by some of them that the documents might contain older material, the recognition was in practice allowing little play. The documents were evaluated as the creations of the ages in which they were written, and this led inevitably to the discounting of their worth as historical sources. But no sooner did new archaeological discoveries begin to pour in that it became evident that a new evaluation was in order, for it began to be clear, in the light of parallels, that at least some of the material of the Excerpt did not originate with the authors of the documents at all, but had been adapted by them from traditions much more ancient, as early as the turn of the century. Indeed, certain scholars had begun to turn their interest from documentary analysis to the study of individual units of tradition within the documents. The pioneer was H. Gunkel, who was the first to apply the method of form criticism in biblical studies, and who early gave attention to certain traditions in Genesis in the light of Babylonian parallels or similars, right? Those myths that were similar. He was followed in this by H. Gressman, who applied similar methods to the study of the traditions of Moses. It is today quite evident that to date the documents by no means dates their content or passes verdict on their value, and that documentary analysis is only the beginning of the critic's task. As one observes, for example, the remarkable way in which the patriarchal narratives of J and E, though presumably written down in the 10th century and after, reflect conditions that obtain a half millennium or more earlier, no other conclusion is possible. Attention must be given therefore to the history of the traditions in their pre-literary form, or prior to them being written down, probably oral or verbal. It has become clear that while one may assign to the various documents absolute and relative dates, their material can be ranked in no near chronological progression, nor can the documents themselves be used to support an equally neat picture of the evolution of Israel's religion. But this has meant that Waldhausenism, in its classical form, has all but ceased to exist, while the documentary hypothesis itself has been forcibly placed in a new light. Archaeology is defined by Webster's New Word Dictionary as the scientific study of life, of the life and culture of ancient peoples. as by excavation of ancient cities, relics, artifacts, etc. While archaeology deals with the past, it is, comparatively speaking, a brand new science. It is less than 100 years old. Well, this book is quite old, so it might be older than that. And has come into its golden age only within the last 25 to 50 years. Ancient man would build one city right on top of another. Whenever a city was destroyed, the people would construct their new homes on top of the old rubble heap. Very often they did not bother to clean up the old site and usually left much pottery lying around. By examining these pottery fragments, the modern archaeologist has been able to tell not only how many cities have been built on one place, but also when these cities had been constructed. In the year 1890, the father of modern archaeology, Dr. W.M. Flinders Petrie, he was like an Egyptologist, etc. He deciphered the Egyptian hieroglyphics from different materials they found, etc. Dr. W.M. Flinders Petrie was able to identify the remains of 8 ancient cities by tracing the shapes, materials and kinds of pottery which he found on one site. He accomplished this feat by digging down nearly 200 feet through a mound of debris known as a tell. So is that why they call it Tel El-Mana? Maybe not. While Petrie discovered the method of archaeology, then again that's T-E-L, isn't it? Yeah, probably not related to that. While Petrie discovered the method of archaeology, the significance of his work was not established until many years later. In 1921, the American archaeologist Dr. William F. Albright, 2 other Americans and 2 Arabs driving 2 donkeys loaded with equipment set out from Jerusalem for a walking tour of the region of northern Palestine. They did not use the well-travelled paths. Instead, they climbed over towers and ruins, living simply on the food of the natives: unleavened bread, cheese, eggs and leaven or fermented milk. For nearly Part 2. While Petrie discovered the method of archaeology, the significance of his work was not established until many years later. In 1921, the American archaeologist Dr. William F. Albright, 2 other Americans and 2 Arabs driving 2 donkeys loaded with equipment, set out from Jerusalem for a walking tour of the region of northern Palestine. They did not use the well-travelled paths. Instead, they climbed over towers and ruins, living simply on the food of the natives: unleavened bread, cheese, eggs and leaven or fermented milk. For nearly 2 years, Dr. Albright and his party paid special attention to the different types of pottery dug from the various levels of the ancient cities. From this evidence, he was able to date the exact years in which the tells have been inhabited. Pottery fragments tell us not only the dates but also the names of ancient cities. They are the clues to the geography as well as the chronology of Bible times. Because of the many empires and cultures which centered in Palestine, place names had changed frequently during the course of the centuries. For example, there had been a controversy for many years whether the Arabic name El-Jib, given to a town just 8 miles north of Jerusalem, was the same as the biblical name Gibeon. In 1956, however, the matter was settled. In the course of clearing the debris from a large rock cut pool just inside the city wall, the archaeologist Dr. James Pritchard found 2 jar handles inscribed with the name Gibeon in ancient Hebrew script. Later, other handles were found to confirm that Al-Jib was the site of the biblical Gibeon. Not only bits of pottery, but also fragments of papyrus are of great importance to the archaeologist. Until 1947, it was believed that the oldest known Bible manuscripts came from the period of 900 CE. In fact, one archaeologist had stated most emphatically, "There is indeed no probability that we shall ever find manuscripts of the Hebrew text going back to a period before the formation of the text, which we know as Masoretic." The Masoretes were Jewish scholars who, in the 9th century CE, gave the Hebrew Bible its present form by putting in punctuation marks. Since the original Hebrew text contained only consonants, they also added vowels in order to preserve what they thought to be the correct reading. But the impossible did come to pass. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls has brought the modern reader much closer to the original text of the Bible by pushing back by nearly 1,000 years the date of the earliest known manuscripts of the Bible. The story of the actual discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the cave is in itself a fascinating account. The late Professor Eliezer Sukenik of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, the first to recognize the antiquity and significance of the scrolls, had left for us in his private journal an account of this event. They, the Arab Bedouins, had been moving with their goats along the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. While searching for a stray goat, they had stumbled across an opening in the rocks overlooking the sea. It excited their curiosity. They threw stones into the cavern and were surprised to hear a strange sound, as if the stones had hit and broken a piece of pottery. But they were too busy with their flocks to investigate, and so they returned the following day. Crawling into the cave, they found themselves in a narrow crevice. On the floor were 8 earthenware jars, 5 on one side, 3 on the other. Several of these jars were still covered with upturned dishes. Inside the jars they found bundles of leather, some wrapped in linen. While groping inside the jars they accidentally broke some. For several weeks they had wandered about with the bundles, showing them occasionally to friends in their tribe who had visited them in their tent. Then they decided to come to Bethlehem, the commercial centre of the Bedouin from the Judean desert, and see what they could get some money for their find. Since the original discovery, other caves have been explored and hundreds of fragments of scrolls have been discovered. Sometimes they use them for fire to keep themselves warm. Archaeologists believe that the original cave was a storehouse for an ancient library of the 1st century CE, in which many manuscripts of much older date were preserved. The explorations now indicate that this barren Dead Sea area had been the site of a kind of Jewish monastery called Kirbet Qumran, which flourished in parts of the 1st century b.c.e. and the 1st century CE. Among the Dead Sea manuscripts found was a leather scroll about 24 feet long, containing 54 columns of text. The Arab Bedouin had discovered a manuscript of the book of Isaiah, which was by nearly 1,000 years old, the oldest copy of the book of Isaiah in existence. Since the earliest Bible manuscripts now known go back only to the 1st or 2nd century BCE, Dead Sea Scrolls, how do we know what the Hebrew language looked like when the Bible itself was written? Here, too, archaeology can help us. On a hot summer day in June 1880, a boy was wading with some of his friends in a pool of water located just south of the old city of Jerusalem. Gradually, he made his way up a tunnel from which the waters of the pool were coming. Suddenly, his foot slipped and he fell into the cold water. While getting up, he noticed that a series of letters had been cut into the stone walls of the tunnel. Later investigation showed that the boy accidentally had discovered 6 lines of writing in ancient Hebrew script. While the existence of the tunnel had been known for a long time, no one had even noticed the story of the building of the tunnel of Siloam, and this passageway was known, which had been engraved on a smooth portion of the wall. The discovery not only revealed the first example of ancient Hebrew writing, but also helped to identify the tunnel built by King Hezekiah of Judah in the 7th century BCE, which is mentioned in the Bible, 2 Kings 10:20. That tunnel of Siloam, isn't it related to that pool that the angel would come down and swirl and everybody would jump into it and get healed of their sickness and all that sort of stuff? And that's the one where that man couldn't get in because he had some 38-year-old illness. He had no one to help him to get in there. And Jesus said, basically, get up, get off your mat and jump in the pool. But he must have gave him a hand, right? And he got healed. Okay? Maybe it was that which led to that pool. Like a tunnel of water that led to that pool. If it's the same pool. A second and even more dramatic discovery of ancient Hebrew writing was made in 1935 by the English archaeologist Dr. James Starkey as he dug in a tell. One day his workmen, while excavating some black rubbish, uncovered small pieces of broken pottery which contained strange writing. These fragments were washed carefully in filtered water so that only the dirt was removed. Soon more than 100 lines of old Hebrew script were available. This discovery is known as the Lachish letters and comes from the time of the prophet Jeremiah, who died in the 6th century BCE. These letters were samples of military correspondence written by a Jewish officer serving in a northern Palestinian outpost to his commander in Lachish. Archaeology also helps us to explain many of the statements in the Bible which have puzzled men for centuries. For example, there are times when the Bible uses figures and numbers which seem unbelievable. One such Bible passage deals with the number of horses and chariots which King Solomon owned. In the book of 1 Kings 10:26-29, it tells that he had no less than 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Is such a figure realistically possible? Most people have questioned its authenticity. However, in 1928, an archaeological expedition came up with an amazing discovery in an excavation of the ancient city of Megiddo. While digging in the fourth layer from the top, the expedition uncovered a large area composed of 5 units of stables. In front of the stables was a huge water tank, which could have provided for each of the 150 horses stabled there as much as 18.5 gallons of water a day. Other nearby excavations showed that as many as 450 horses could be stabled and 150 chariots accommodated comfortably in Megiddo. As soon as one recalls that King Solomon had built, according to the Bible, many cities for his chariots, the discovery at Megiddo makes the numbers found in the Bible very real and understandable. Likewise, archaeology also tells us things about which the Bible itself is often silent, or at the most gives only a hint. For example, archaeological finds have brought to light an unknown language called Ugarit. One day in the spring of 1928, a peasant was ploughing his field in the area of Ras Shamra, which is on the northern coast of Syria. Suddenly his plough struck a large stone. The farmer lifted up the stone and found that it belonged to a tomb. The tomb itself contained pottery, including several small vases that were unbroken. The discovery of this cemetery prompted archaeologists to explore further. Soon, a whole city, including a library containing many clay tablets inscribed in an unknown language, was uncovered. When the tablets were translated several years later, the archaeological world realized that an entirely new branch of studies had been discovered. It was called Ugarit, after the ancient name of the town in which the text had been found. The discoveries of Ugarit also revealed new information about the religion which the Israelites found when they entered Canaan. Now we know, for example, that the Canaanites had a Bible whose poetry resembles some of the writings of our present book of Psalms. They also had a highly organized system of gods, pantheons of gods and goddesses, as well as the priesthood. No longer are we dependent today for our knowledge of what idol worship was like on the few scattered references in the Bible. The Ugaritic texts tell us in great detail the beliefs and practices of the 14th century BCE Canaanites. While archaeological discoveries help to clarify the meaning of many passages in the Bible too has been a valuable help to the archaeologists. For example, Dr. Nelson Glueck, president of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institution of Religion, was a strong believer in the use of the Bible for archaeological purposes, and as a result, he has unearthed many famous archaeological treasures, not the least of which is King Solomon's copper mines. For many years, no one had found justification for the biblical statement that Palestine at one time had been a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. Deuteronomy 8:9. Dr. Glueck nevertheless set out to discover whether or not there really were copper mines. The Bible gave him his clue. In the book of Numbers 21:9, it is said that Moses had healed the people of Israel with a copper serpent. This event was supposed to have taken place in the Wadi Araba, in the desert regions of southern Palestine. It was reasonable, therefore, assumed Dr. Glueck, that copper could be found in the region even now. In 1932, he began his work. In a few years, he had not only discovered copper in the Wadi Araba, but also had rediscovered the ancient city of Ezion Geber on the Gulf of Aqaba. This city was King Solomon's port, from which his ships sailed to carry on commerce in Africa and Asia. Ezion Geber was also the site, as Dr. Glueck has shown, of the largest copper smelter of ancient times. The ones already partly roasted at the mines in the Wadi Arabah were sent to Ezion Geber for further refinements. From that southernmost city of Solomon's power came ingots and finished metal articles for home consumption and for the foreign export trade. In summary, it may be concluded that in light of the discoveries of archaeology, today's modernists, in contrast to those of yesterday, tend to place greater emphasis upon the trustworthiness of the Bible narrative. It is important to point out, however, that archaeology seeks neither to prove nor to disprove the religious message of the Torah, or for that matter, of the entire Bible. The Bible is not a history book. Note that. The Bible is not a history book. Probably a history of the Israelites, the Jews, the Hebrews, etc. Maybe. On the other hand, it is equally apparent that the religious message of the Bible cannot be understood properly outside the framework of history. The purpose of archaeology is to give us a clearer picture of the historical setting within which the birth of the Torah, the Book of Instructions, the Book of Law, that special part of the Bible with which we are concerned, took place. Archaeology does not presume to teach theology. Dr. Nelson Glueck had stated the issue succinctly when he wrote, "The truths of the Bible expressed in the commandments and prophecy, in legend and law, in history and myth, in unvarnished and biographical sketches and compressed genealogical tables, and some of them repeated in different versions, not only in different books but in the same chapters, are not susceptible to proof of any kind. They can neither be buttressed nor invalidated archaeologically. New discovery may perhaps modify or fill out a particular account in the biblical annals, but it can never replace or refute or corroborate its religious words. The discoveries by archaeological exploration and excavations in Bible lands have a relevancy to historical events in the Bible, but in no wise affect its religious propositions or ethical decrees, which are applicable to all peoples in all lands at all times. From this point of view, there is no relationship between archaeological discoveries in Bible lands and the Bible itself, or between the finds of archaeology and the teachings of Judaism. Archaeology helps us understand better the land in which the Bible evolved, in which Judaism emerged and developed. It gives us more information than is otherwise available, either in the pages of the Bible or elsewhere, about the historical situations which evoked revolutionary religious doctrines in harmony with the genius of developing Judaism. Part 3. Chapter 2. Welcome. Chapter 2. Mesopotamian beginnings. Although scientists believe that our Earth is from 2 to 3 billion years old and that man has lived on the Earth for approximately 1 million years or more, modern civilization is a comparatively new event in world history. The transition between primitive and modern civilization occurred only 6,000 years ago in the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in Asia Minor and of the Nile River in North Africa. In both Mesopotamia and Egypt, the lands surrounding the valleys were drying up and forming deserts. Nature was forcing men who had roamed these lands for hundreds of thousands of years to come together in large groups near the rivers. To become civilized, these men needed three things: protection from marauders, ways of getting food, and protection from each other. In the Tigris-Euphrates region, the high hills to the north and the desert to the south provided some protection. In the Nile Valley, the great deserts in the Mediterranean Sea gave men safety from invaders for a long time. Likewise, it was easy to obtain food in both regions without cultivation. Thus, men could live for a few years without planting anything and without raising their own animals. This was very important. Now, instead of worrying about the next meal, men could plan their food supply over a long period of time by developing new ways of growing plants and taming animals. This new security gave the people of these two regions the time to devote themselves to the third requirement for civilization. Protection from each other was the one necessity which nature could not supply. Men had to supply it themselves. At last, men had the opportunity to invent government, a system of laws by which people living in large cities and spread out over wide areas could cooperate with each other for their mutual welfare. And these two cradles of civilization, the beginnings of Jewish history, also took place. In Mesopotamia, the people made rapid strides in organizing their way of life. For example, improved agriculture permitted the support of an increased population, while developed urban life made possible new advances in the arts and crafts. The Mesopotamians invented the wheel and the arch, and their metalworking and gem cutting reached heights of excellence seldom surpassed. Trade and cultural contacts reached far and wide. Likewise, they developed the world's first system of writing. Numerous examples of their wedge-shaped or cuneiform letters have been discovered by archaeologists, giving evidence of what must have been an abundant literature. In the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, the foundation for a science of mathematics also was laid. In the fields of government and religion, too, a high degree of organization was evident. First of all, Mesopotamia was organized into a system of city-states, most of which were quite small. Although one city-state was able at times to conquer another, no one city-state ever succeeded in asserting itself over all the others. Apparently, the idea of uniting all the city-states was regarded as a sin against the gods. Second, the city-state was a government ruled by a god. The city and its lands were the god's estate, the temple his home. All community activities were based, therefore, upon religion. Even the economic life was organized about the temple, with its gardens, fields and storehouses. The people, each in his place, were the god's retainers, workers on his estate. Third, each city was ruled by an earthly city king or city priest of the local temple. Although the offices of the city king and the city priest were not identical, the authority which each exercised was often, for all intents, the same. Each ruled as the earthly representative of the god and managed the estate. Earthly representative of the god and managed the estate. Where there was both a king and a priest, the authority of the priest generally was subordinated to that of the king, or subject to that of the king. According to Mesopotamian traditions, the authority of the city king came down from heaven at the beginning of time. Recent archaeological evidence indicates, however, that the government originally was composed of a city assembly. From these beginnings there emerged gradually the city king, first as an emergency measure and later as a permanent institution. Nevertheless, the tradition was maintained that the city king held his authority as a result of divine election, and that's why they were called Ashur, Banipal, Ashur Badin, etc., because they had that title of their god was Ashur.